Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the PC Helps sponsored webcast, Get Your Head in the Cloud, Optimizing the End User's Experience with Office 365. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. You may, however, submit questions to the speaker through the chat feature located to the left of your screen. We will also conduct a live question and answer session at the end of the conference should you want to ask your question directly to the speaker. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded Thursday, August 15th, 2013. Our host today is Joe Puckett, Director of Training for PC Helps. Joe will discuss what your IT team needs to know going into an Office 365 migration and how to prepare for the end user and organizational challenges that come with operating in the cloud. With that, Joe, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Susan. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. One thing I want to point out as we start is we've talked to a lot of organizations that have considered and or actually implemented various cloud solutions, including Office 365, and we found something to hold true that is true of buying anything, be it a toaster, an automobile, or enterprise technology, and that is that if you don't have a really clear picture of what it is you want to buy, then there will be an influence more of what the vendor wants to sell when you make the purchase. And one of the things that is really hard to assess unless you work with it all the time is how a particular change is going to affect the end user community. But along the way to doing that, we may also be covering some things that would be good for you to keep in mind just in the general assessment of these kinds of options. They fall into these general categories. We're going to take a focus on how cloud offerings in general and Office 365 in particular try to address concerns of end users and IT departments. Sometimes those align. Sometimes, as you're well aware, they're completely opposite. Installed applications have huge feature sets, and many users don't need all those features. And the features sometimes only serve to make them hard for the users who have lower needs to find what they want in all the jumble of possible features. While the new Microsoft Office interface has really taken some pretty effective steps to help with this, the reduced feature sets of cloud-delivered applications may be more appropriate for many of your users. So we'll take a look at that and how to identify the users for whom it will be appropriate and those for whom the full feature set is going to be necessary. Another thing we can't change, even though we might like to, is that whenever things change, humans often need help. So there will be some support challenges if you make any change, and we'll try to give you a heads up as to what the scale of those would be in our experience with people moving to Office 365. One of the things that end users want from the cloud may be anathema to IT security. And the naming conventions in Office 365 may not help with this. So we're going to take a look at navigating that blend between corporate and personal information storage and give you a heads up about some terminology that could be a little confusing there. And having the best and most appropriate technology doesn't provide return on investment unless people use it in a way that boosts their productivity. And with moving to Office 365, even if you just do the investigation in a certain way, you may come up with information that will help you boost that adoption, use, and return on investment from typical technologies, even if you find that Office 365 is not the best way for you to do this. Now we're going to ask you to help us understand a little bit about the group by answering this polling question to give us an idea of where you are in terms of consideration of Office 365 specifically, although you may want to answer that in the idea of cloud in general. Okay, thank you. We're seeing some responses in there. And okay, it looks like we actually have a lot of people who've made a decision and are planning deployment. A couple that have already deployed. Well, we can always do some of these things afterwards. And okay, a somewhat smaller group that haven't actually made the decision yet. Okay, so we'll cover some of the things we were planning to for those folks, but we'll also then be able to go on and explain how some of the things can go on that we cover will be useful for those who are further along in the process. Okay, I'm going to pop those results up so that you're able to see those for a second, and then we're going to moving on to covering the notion of cloud and Office 365 in particular. Nearly all the big software and service providers are touting cloud delivery. Microsoft uses Office 365. Google, it's Google Apps. Apple, try to use an Apple device and not be reminded about iCloud about 5 times a month. You can't even buy a traditional installation of the newest version of Adobe's Creative Suite. It's cloud, cloud, cloud. Why is this happening? Well, they're all responding to the same external requests from end users and IT departments and internal pressures that affect every business. Now, for the moment, we'll get back to the things for end users and IT departments, but let's take a look at what is in it for the companies that are offering these services. And these are not condemnation. This is just a reality that they're a business. And one of the things they're trying to get with the cloud approach is to avoid something that was really common, the revenue stream versus a boom-bust sales cycle when you push out a major new version and that's when people buy things, and then you put that money in the bank and you hope it lasts until you get your next new version out. And I think we've all seen versions of software, I'm not saying Microsoft in particular, but we've seen versions of software from multiple vendors that they put it out there and you're like, okay, this really wasn't finished. So why did they bring it out now? Why didn't they wait? Well, because their revenue cycle is based on selling a new thing when you do traditionally installed software. So you have to have a new software, a new service, a new something to give the sales department something to talk about so they can get people to buy. With cloud delivery, which is typically purchased on more of a subscription kind of a basis, that smooths out. That's a very, very good thing for the vendor, and it may actually be a good thing for you as an IT provider because you're less likely to see sales-driven changes and more likely to see changes based on functionality. But it is something we do need to consider, and we want to be aware of that when we're talking about cloud vendors and making a choice between that and traditional methods. The other thing is that they want to generate loyalty by making it easier to continue to buy from them. It's a contract. It just comes up. They'll go for auto renewal. And these are all things that if you were running the business, you would do it this way too, at least if you're smart. And so we know this is going to happen. We know this is one of their motivations for doing it. But be aware that it is a path that you want to be careful before you start going down it, because one of the things that's attractive to the vendor is that it is a path that once you start down it, it's not something you're going to be as easily able to walk away from as you might some of the alternative paths. So what is it that they've been hearing from end users that leads them to want to do cloud things? One of the big differences between the boomer and buster generations, that would be my brother and I, and the Gen X and Gen Ys, which would be our children, is how they view work and personal life. The B generations view those two things as very separate and tend to want the things related to them to be separated. We are perfectly okay with having work clothes and casual clothes. I don't know how many Gen XYs you know, but they would really prefer just to go to work in whatever they already own. Those preferences also apply to information and technology. XYs, and we need to remember that these are the people who will be using future technology products, and someday they will be the people who are making technology purchasing decisions at companies. They really don't see a clear divide between work and personal anything. They want their work and personal data to be available to them on any device that they choose from anywhere at any time. Their preference for using their own devices for work, or at least being able to pick their own device and have their personal information on it, is a lot of what's driving the whole BYOD thing and all of its cognate and related sort of concepts. This is what the next upcoming generations want. This is the way they like to work, and the cloud providers are hearing it, and it's a pretty good thing as an IT department if you hear it, because they will be in charge someday. Now, part of the problems is this can create monumental problems for IT, especially in the areas of data security. It's an expectation of people who someday be leading your business that they can get to it any time, and Microsoft and other cloud providers are responding to this eventuality, but they're also trying to provide some options that are acceptable to IT departments who have real responsibilities here and now. And so some of the things that they're hearing are very much around, you want security and reliability. It has to work all the time, and it really has to protect against viruses, spam, and those sorts of things. You're hearing increasingly that people want access from anywhere, and unfortunately the old answer of the VPN with all the different kinds of devices and everything gets increasingly hard to make it work. And also when we start taking a look at different end user profiles, different kinds of end users, the VPN thing is just not as good a solution as it once was. And as always, they hear from businesses that we're interested in value, both in terms of total cost of ownership and return on investment. Now, one of the questions that really doesn't get addressed as much as it could and would be helpful to do is, how much is that debate about upgrading costing us? I mean, I don't know about you, but I've talked to a lot of IT people that the thing they dread most is having to go through the procedure of convincing everybody that it really is time to upgrade. And then the work alone is horrible in terms of the amount, but the decision-making process is really a very costly thing. And one of the things about cloud that is attractive to some organizations is that decision is made pretty much for you once you start down this path. Now, that can be a great thing for you, but we'll also look at some places where that could be problematic. To make it a little more specific, let's take a look at some of the kinds of things that IT people have been known to say that the cloud vendors and Office 365 are really aimed at. One is our IT managers are tied to servers. It's a 24/7 up world, and if you are directly responsible for those servers being running, well, if you're one of the B generations and you would like to separate your personal life and your work life, you might not get as much of that option as you like if you're running your own servers. And the cloud providers have heard that, and that's one of the goals, is they want to free you up from those kinds of things. Not being able to risk spam and viruses and various things that attack and impact your customers. It's a big part of your job to protect people from other people and themselves. And while there is no doubt that no vendor will ever care about your people as much as you do, it is a very complicated and always changing specialty. And so for you to stay up on top of all that is really very time consuming, and still you may not be able to do it as well as some. In fact, you may hire security experts from time to time because of this. The vendors have heard this, and it's one of the things they're trying to address. We need productivity tools at a total cost of ownership we can afford. IT is sometimes seen exclusively as a cost. And one of the opportunities we'll talk about is a possibility of changing that. But it is a cost, and as with every other cost the business has, what's your goal? You want to minimize it. And vendors have heard this, and it's one of the things they're trying to help you do. It's hard to keep track of all our licensing costs. Okay, here's something I will not do. I am not going to say anything specific about licensing costs, because that is largely because the options for perpetual licensing are insanely complicated, and I found that only some of the people for whom doing that is their full-time job actually fully understand it. You may have run into that as well. Now, cloud licensing does tend to be a little simpler and more flexible, and we'll point out some of the things that you want to think about, but won't go into a lot of details as opposed to specific plans. Users still need to get their work done when they're traveling, and our mobile users need access to more than just email without the VPN. You have to manage security risks. Doing that without the shield of having a single entry point, it gets more complicated. And the vendors have a lot of motivation to develop good solutions to this problem. And as a result of that, they may have some solutions that are better than ones you could work out on your own and that actually may be the most suitable for you. Managing complex infrastructure takes our IT staff away from the more important projects. One of the things that gets you viewed as just a cost is if you're always doing maintenance and management and never really accomplishing anything new. By turning that over to specialists and outsourcing in essence to the cloud provider, that may give you the opportunity to be a more strategic department. And we need our tools to work together out of the box. Yeah, I've worked with people that explain fully why that's a big issue, because getting systems to talk to each other is really difficult. Now, while it would be a great thing to get all your systems to talk to each other out of the box, we always want to take a look at the motivations of the people on the other side of a table when there's a negotiation. And remember that one of the reasons the cloud providers are motivated to do this is if you're getting everything from one cloud provider, that really works into their goal of building loyalty and making it easier for you to just continue with them. But with that in mind, it still may be absolutely the best way, whether it be Office 365 or one of the cloud offerings, to handle that thing of getting everything to talk to the other things. So what they're really trying to offer is various kinds of services, and we see those in orange across the bottom there. And a lot of it focuses on communication and collaboration. And of course, a lot of this is going to focus on whatever the current hot terms are. So you notice enterprise social. We're going to try to take a closer look at some of the less interesting and newsworthy areas of IT and how it affects those kinds of things if you were to choose a cloud or Office 365 offering and how it affects those more enduring basics. Now, keep in mind that the impetus for cloud to provide the consistent experience across various devices that end users want, in many ways, this actually does work in the favor of the IT department. Because if it's already set up to work across those devices, it does give you a lot more freedom to change devices as the business needs change. So while that is primarily a consumer and user-driven choice, it's also something that can work to your benefit. And that's true of pretty much all of the cloud offerings. Now, the other side, the cloud on your terms, this is something that's not true of all of them that tends to be more true of Office 365. And that is that sometimes there are things that you really just don't want to deal with, and you'd be glad somebody else dealt with it. Let's say it's your Exchange server. There are other things that data security says, nah, I really need to keep control of this in my regulatory environment. Let's say it's file storage, and you're going to do that in SharePoint. On some of the cloud offerings, it's all cloud and that's it. With Office 365, you do have the capability, and you want to explore which pieces of it you would want to do which ways, of doing either all online, all on-premise, or some hybrid approach. So those are the concerns that we've seen that affect end users and IT folks. Let's take a look at exactly what is Office 365. First, let's talk a little bit about what it's not. Office 365 is not a new technology. Office 365 is not a cloud-only service. Office 365 is a way of acquiring and delivering software and supporting technologies, and you see which ones up there on this are the primary ones up there on the screen. Now, although analogies tend to break down if you push them too hard, one that can help understand Office 365 is that it's leasing versus owning. So it doesn't really change what you get. What it changes is how you acquire it and how you pay for it. So Office 365, some of the ways that works out that have confused people, Office 365 is not a version number because Office 365 is not a technology. If you acquire the standard installed Office Professional through Office 365, right now you will get Office 2013 Professional. Once people downloaded it, if they were already using 2013, they probably wouldn't notice that anything happened because it is exactly the same Office 2013 that you will get if you go out and buy licenses and install them yourself. It's not a different technology. If you acquire SharePoint through Office 365, it'll be on a SharePoint 2013 server. And so the Office web apps that actually come out of SharePoint will be the Office 2013 versions of the web apps. They're really not Office 365. That's more about how you bought it, how you acquire it, who runs it, than it is about what technologies you actually get. Now, one of the motivators for choosing a cloud solution is having end users who don't need feature-rich installed applications. Before we look at how this affects decisions about cloud services in Office 365, please help us to understand the group a little better with one more question by telling us your current usage of web-delivered email. Is this something that this is the only way people can get their email? Is people only get it through installed clients like Outlook, or do you have a mixed environment? Okay, well, thank you for those quick responses, and we're very largely looking mixed environment. We have nobody exclusively web so far. Oh, one. Okay. Okay, good. This is exactly what we were expecting, proportions-wise, and so we should be really well targeted. I'm going to show you those results at the moment. And so it's really mostly a mixed environment. We all have web access of one sort or another, which tells me that we do need to consider feature usage. And we do have some folks that are only web delivery, which tells me that we do have some people who are going to be described very well on this next slide. This is about, there are two things we need to look at, user types and user topography. And this is an exercise that the whole cloud thing and Office 365 has brought about that really provides some benefits if you never do cloud anything. And the first piece of it is user type, which is driven by need. Now, over the years, I know when I started doing this, Microsoft Office didn't do half of what it does now. In fact, a lot of the applications didn't exist. And as time has gone on, it's gotten more and more stuff, which is great for the knowledge worker, the high-need worker. And we need to understand those people. On the other hand, what it's done is just add layer after layer for people who have lower needs. And the low end of the spectrum we're going to call the connected production worker. Let's take a little closer look at these folks. Knowledge workers, their productivity is through computer activities. They're the ones, they have high feature needs. Now, while no two use exactly the same features, they do tend to use a lot of features. Some of the kinds of people who tend to be knowledge workers, executives, admins, sales, and marketing, although not all sales in particular are knowledge workers. On the other end of the scale are connected production workers. Their product is from non-computer activities. The reason you want to get them connected is, as a business, it's just more efficient to communicate through email. Everybody should have a calendar, and these things are just very useful ways of supporting corporate communication and getting everybody tied in. But these folks are not going to really push the envelope of what these can do, and those extra features just are a waste. First of all, money, and they have to wade through them. It's a waste of their time. Some kinds of people who typically are connected production workers, retail workers, delivery people, service technicians. Understanding who those people are and being able to provide exactly the feature set they need is one of the things that the cloud and hybrid approaches are working on providing. And we're going to take a look at how Office 365, in particular, the kinds of buzzwords you need to look at and aspects of it, and what you can do to help sort through these people and support them if you make a transition. Now, the other thing is the topography of user. This is about time and space. Where do they work and when do they work, both in sense of how long will they work and what time of day do they work, and all those aspects. Now, office workers are obviously people that work in an office. You tend to have a high concentration of knowledge workers in an office, but just because they work in an office doesn't mean they're a knowledge worker. Very often their needs are a little bit lower. So that while there tends to be concentration of high need knowledge workers in offices, it's not universal. And to do any kind of a cloud thing, or especially Office 365, one of your big cost savings is accurately identifying people that don't need the expensive feature-laden things. So your office workers are mostly going to be knowledge workers and will probably need the full-featured applications and the higher-end licenses in a cloud or Office 365 kind of environment. But it won't be universally so, and it's important to figure out which ones don't, because otherwise you're spending money that you don't need to spend. Kiosk workers right now are people who tend to go to a shared computer. They have typically, the reason they're using a shared computer is they have fairly low needs. And one of the options that you have once you, if you've already done the exposure of certain things without the VPN from outside and you're ready to embrace a BYOD type approach, these people may not even need the shared computers anymore. They may be able to get everything on their smartphone, and we'll talk about how that can affect things. Seasonal workers are mobile within time. And one of the advantages of a buy just what you need kind of approach with Office 365 or things like it is that you don't typically have to say, okay, to get my best price, I've got to figure out how many of these I'm going to need for the next 5 years. I don't know about you, but predicting 5 years in advance is really tough. And then also many businesses have seasonal adjustments where tax time, we hire lots more of accounting people. Well, they're very likely to be high-need knowledge workers, but you don't need perpetual forever licenses that cost a lot for them. If you can just get the license for the 3 months they'll be working, that's your best deal. And that's something that Office 365 can do that more traditional ownership models don't work so well. And then we have our remote workers. The remote workers span the feature need spectrum. And even their title doesn't really tell you everything. Some remote sales people need a lot of calendar and collaboration capability. Some need very little. Having flexibility in a licensing model allows you to get it right in the first place in terms of what features remote workers get, and also limits your losses when you get it wrong. And this is something you have to really go in with the mindset. Even if you very carefully analyze all of your combinations of knowledge workers, connected production workers, and all the topographies, and get people in what you believe to be the right groups so you can pick exactly the right Office 365 feature sets to give to them, I'm sorry, you're human, you're going to be wrong on some of them. And one of the advantages of the flexibility is that when that happens, you haven't bought a very expensive license that you can never get rid of because you've already paid for it. And you also haven't set up where you bought a bunch of licenses and you got them at a good price because you bought so many at a time, and now you've got to buy one and it turns out to be very expensive because you're buying a smaller number. So if you're in those kinds of situations where your people are really hard to figure out and categorize, a leasing approach, an Office 365 licensing approach, really may give you the flexibility you need. Also, if you tend to have big seasonal swings in your employee base, or if you're in a company that tends to go through growth spurts, this kind of flexibility can be really useful for you. Let's take a look at some of the ways that works out. I mentioned licensing cost and models. Think of it as vehicles or office equipment. If leasing would make sense, then Office 365 may make sense for the same reasons that leasing these other things does. And if buying makes sense for those kinds of things, the same factors go into figuring out if buying software and other technologies does. Infrastructure. Here's one where, as an IT department, you've got a lot of time spent maintaining things. Is that the best use of your staff time? Is it tying your people to a 24/7 schedule that really makes them think of work as a 4-letter word? Those can be good things. things to watch out for with a cloud kind of an approach. When you move to the cloud, and remember with Office 365 you can have a mixed model, updates are done automatically. And now you can look into it and see if there's some influence there, but that's something you want to look at. Because I happen to know there are companies out there that have to be careful about automatic updates because of compatibility with legacy systems. If that's something that's been important to you in the past, you want to get a real clear picture of what updates will happen automatically and which you can choose when you're using the Office 365 licensing model. Now, if you pull some of that on-premise, then it works pretty much the way it always has in terms of maintenance and updates. So, software upgrades. As we mentioned before, the battle over should we spend the money to upgrade now, pretty much done because it's a lease. When they release the new one, you get the new one. Again, if you have issues with Office and legacy systems, you may want to be really clear as to what's required moves and what you can control. Now, for desktop applications, you're going to, for the connected production workers who probably aren't likely to have Office connected to a lot of systems, that's pretty much automatic. They get the updates. If you're familiar with using smartphone apps and tablet apps and Windows 8 apps that run in a modern interface, you're probably kind of used to this already. But when you do the update, it may have security patches, it may have bug fixes, but it often actually brings new features. That's very much the case for the web-delivered apps, like the Excel web app, the Outlook web app, the Word web app. What we expect to see in the future, and Microsoft is doing a lot of internal rearranging to make this happen, is you will increasingly see that happen with the higher end feature applications that are typically installed. So this is software upgrades is just something that they expect them to happen more frequently in the future. Expect updates to include additional features, and if those things are a problem for you now, you want to be really careful as you consider any kind of a web anything, including Office 365. There's always security, and this actually ties into the on-premise versus off-premise. You can, it may make sense for you to hire your own security experts and control everything. Where it doesn't, one of the advantages of a cloud-based solution is that that provider, they need to have those experts, and so they do have them. And of course, it's a trust relationship, but ask about how they manage that. Ask what their track record is. Look out in the press. I have really not seen anything negative about Microsoft in terms of these kinds of things. Now, and the other thing they do to make that easy for you is they do offer the ability for you to keep some of it on-premise and then put out the things that are safe for you to do into the cloud. Now, there's one thing I do want to point out here with the that is going to be very confusing. When I've gone out and done Windows 8 training, I see people come in with their device and they open it up and there's SkyDrive, and they're like, oh, let me put my files in there. And unless I've heard otherwise from the IT department ahead of time, what I tell them is this: that SkyDrive thing, do not put any company information in there. That is hosted on Microsoft's servers. And while I have no knowledge that this is inherently insecure more than any other server, unless somebody from your IT security department tells you it is okay to put business information into the SkyDrive, don't do it. My recommendation is, if you really don't want people doing this, and you got to watch for it because of course they make the apps for Android and everything else, then you need to make sure that people are very aware of this. And to add confusion to it, with Office 365 in particular, but just SharePoint in general, you're going to see something called SkyDrive Pro. Does anybody remember Outlook Express, which had nothing to do with Outlook? Okay, SkyDrive and SkyDrive Pro sound the same, but they're very different. SkyDrive Pro could be hosted by Microsoft. It could be on your own SharePoint service that are on premise, but it's going to look and act a lot like SkyDrive. This confuses end users badly. And if it is important to you, as I know it is to many IT people, that if you're in a certain highly regulated business, you do not want your information going into those servers. And so if you remember the Greek legend of Sisyphus, who was sentenced to spend eternity rolling a big rock up a hill, only every night to have it roll back down and he had to do it again in the morning, keeping people aware of where they can and can't put corporate information is like being Sisyphus. It's just a never-ending thing. And one particular thing you want to target on that is SkyDrive versus SkyDrive Pro, unless you're in a situation where it is okay for SkyDrive. So those are some of the dynamics to consider. So what happens when we actually have people start using these things? As you can see, any change tends to create a certain amount of disruption. So what kind of disruption factor can you expect from Office 365? In all likelihood, it would be pretty low. The key to it is making sure that you match your feature set to the particular user's needs. So that whole knowledge worker versus connected production worker thing, you need to figure that out, because that'll be what will help you actually get your lowest total cost of ownership, because you got the right licenses, and it also reduces disruption. Now, even if you do that right, if people are used to using the installed version and they now are using the web version, there's going to be a little bit of adjustment required. It's not major, but there is some adjustment, because typically if you take away lots of features that they don't need, they don't really notice it all that much. But they may notice, and so you do need to plan for that. If you do allow connection to your corporate email exchange server on various types of devices, just be aware that when you make that change, and they have to be changed unless you can remote change them all, it is going to require that the end user do that. And the procedures for doing that on a mobile device are actually determined by the mobile device vendor. And it created quite a stir a while back when Google decided to make Android stop using Exchange ActiveSync, which was the same in iOS and Windows Phone and pretty much everywhere else, and start using their own thing. And now fortunately, if you get people into the Outlook web app interface and they hit the help, they are actually very good step-by-step instructions that Microsoft has done a good job of keeping updated about how to make the change for your mobile device. Now the problem is that I know a lot of people I'm talking to have probably experienced this. Just giving people accurate instructions doesn't get it done, and doesn't mean it won't be disruptive and they won't need help. But the information is there, but just be aware that indeed you need to check with the kind of devices you have as to what's going to be needed to be done, and get that information out. Delivering installed apps through Office 365 may be a little unfamiliar to end users. So if you can literally just get in there and take away their already installed Office 2013 and download it through Office 365 with some time when they're not at the computer, they won't know anything happened. But if they need to participate, that does tend to create a little bit of disruption, and it tends to raise questions about why is this different, and just need to get it clearly across. It's not different. It's the same installed thing you already had, assuming it's the same version. Using SharePoint for file storage requires some adaptation and specific knowledge. One of the things about that is that it makes files available outside without a firewall, and that while that can answer a lot of business needs, they're now using web. Now, your B generations are the ones that are going to be a problem with this, okay? Because we're used to doing things the way we're used to doing things, and we haven't used Dropbox and all these other web-based file storage things. People who have used those, they're going to take to SharePoint like it's nothing. But for those others, I'm going to share one very specific tip with you. When people who are used to using Windows Explorer, what's called File Explorer Windows 8, get to SharePoint, make up posters and put them on the wall to tell people to go to the Library tab the Connect and Export group, and there's a little icon in there that doesn't have a label next to it, but if you hover over it, it will say Open with Explorer. And that allows them to open that SharePoint document library folder in their familiar Windows Explorer interface. That alone can reduce a lot of the disruption from moving to Office 365 and using SharePoint as a storage. Okay, so what are some of the other implications for our end users? If they're using installed software and are going to continue to, not much is going to change. If they're using the web apps interfaces change whenever they change the server. Now that's going to be true also if you're running your own Exchange server purchased from a different licensing approach. If you upgrade your server or you patch your server, functionality and appearance may change. So it's not really just unique to Office 365, but rather just to moving more people to the web interface for their mail. One of the things they're going to love is that applications and files may be easier to access from off-site locations, which for your road warriors is really, they're going to love this. Implications for IT people. Using cloud or co-location approaches really is an opportunity, if it's otherwise appropriate, to shift your role away from setup and maintenance and towards more business strategic kinds of things. One of the real tragedies is that oftentimes IT is just so busy maintaining that they end up being looked at as essentially, you're the plumber. And as long as the pipes are working, we really don't want to hear from the plumber. If you get away from that, it may allow you to do more strategic and business impactful kinds of things. Now, there is a change there. When you have the chain of command, you give an order, it goes down the chain, it gets done. When you do any of these cloud or co-location kind of approaches, you need to get that done through a vendor. And not that it can't be done, but it's a slightly different skill set. Vendor management becomes more important, and it's a matter of finding out, really, what exactly does my agreement say, and who is the actual person I talk to at the vendor to make this happen? You may also discover there's a need to be a little more proactive in educating end users about security. And there's also a tendency of software as a service delivery to do patching and upgrading automatically, as we've mentioned. And if you have legacy systems and whatnot, you need to be really careful about maintaining compatibility, and you need a backup plan for if something happens that blows things up that you didn't expect. Okay, we always, in terms of getting things rolled out and helping people make use of them, talk about the tools, the training, and the support. And those get factored in with Office 365 as they do with most deployments in 3 different stages, which tend to be specific times. In the affinity and awareness stage, your tool is a communication plan. You need to get information out there ahead of time. One of the great things to do is tips and tricks. Hey, when you get this, you'll be able to this. Or, oh, when you get this, this is going to be a little different. Build some enthusiasm. Have the device bar. Have somebody out there, and it's somebody who isn't just, I mean, you may have seen it. You go through the wholesale club or the grocery store, and you have your people that are supposed to give out samples of someone. Would you like a sample? Well, they don't give out many samples, even though it may taste great. Now, the one who's excited and enthusiastic, they get people to take the sample, and that gets people to buy. So one of the key things you want about, if you're going to do this kind of approach of trying to get people excited about it, make sure your presenters are excited. This is also a stage where you want to train the trainer. And by trainer, I also mean support person. And those are different people than you may think. Of course, you have your formal support people, but even companies that have PC Helps as a partner for their off-the-shelf support, there's always a shadow support network going there. And there's always a department guru, and there's a group I try to get people to think about whenever I can, because they are really important to the perception of your adoption of anything. And that are your executive admins. Because who do the executives who you really do want to think highly of your decision and implementation, who do they go to when they need training or support on these things? They do not go to your help desk. they go to their exec admin. And so they are a very important group, and they may not be the ones you want to use as early adopters, which is a really good thing to do if you're going to identify the department gurus, but they are a group to make sure they are comfortable, they are aware, and that if they have a question, they absolutely know who they're going to turn to, and it will be somebody that can meet their standards for giving an answer. That's all stuff to get ready in Affinity and awareness. Then comes deployment day. That's when you want to get your quick references out there, sometimes a physical card, real stuff on the home page of your intranet, any kind of thing they can get to quickly that covers the main topics. This is when you want to concentrate your instructor-led training, and also you want to concentrate that training for the people who are experiencing the biggest change. And so you'll do that as you work through the user types and user topographies. That'll help you identify where to target your instructor-led training rather than do a one-size-fits-all approach. You want to make sure your self-paced training is there, and think of it not only as an alternative to instructor-led training, but as a warm-up for and also a follow-up to instructor-led training, and remind people to use it that way. And this, of course, is when you're going to get a spike of phone volume. Now, if you're just pretty much replacing on-premise stuff or stuff that was purchased with essentially identical stuff that's done through Office 365, you're not going to see as big of a spike in your need for phone support, but you need to analyze what's going to happen and prepare for it. Now, here's another thing that thinking through Office 365 and preparing people for that, one of the biggest losses of return on technology investment is we put out all these great and wonderful tools, we put them out smoothly, fully working, and people only use half of the stuff in them that they could to save time and become more productive. And your return on investment just drops. When you go through the exercise of identifying user need profiles, and you know who your knowledge workers are, you now know where your opportunity to drive return on investment through more thorough use of the features of the software lives. You've identified those people. And some of them are not going to be the people you thought they were. And so this is a chance to, as you go beyond this, to do task-focused training. Because while the knowledge worker is identified by using a lot of features, your exec admin uses the living daylights out of Word and Outlook. Your accounting people mainly use Excel. Your marketing people are more prone to use PowerPoint. And so by having identified the various groups, you're able to target task-focused training to them, and so they won't say, well, that didn't help me. You'll actually be able to get productivity improvement with a very minimal amount of time spent in training. Again, as people continue to use things and venture more into it, you are going to get more of a steady stream of calls, and also but be aware that you do need to handle those, and it's kind of funny. The adoption curve tends to have bumps at the you roll off software that's the least bit different, and you're going to get a big bump as we come up on the end of the next quarter, on the end of the next year, on the end of when people do those things they don't do all the time. So be aware that the bumps are coming and plan for them. And also one of the things to look at is that the cloud stuff very, very often has lots of, as do the on-premise things, but analytics and reporting. If you're already using some of the analytics and reporting from the back-end processes, that can be, make sure that your cloud provider gets it for you, because this is how you're going to target who's using what, and it'll give you an idea where to put your resources in terms of maximizing application utilization, and by doing so, your return on investment, because you actually do boost productivity. Okay, thank you for hanging in there while we got through those things. I hope you found it helpful, but I also hope that you'll have questions, because I've been on a lot of webcasts where I was a participant, and there were lots of questions. And when I do a webcast, there tend not to be a lot of questions, and well, that creates two problems for me. One is I get a big head because I think I must have done such a great job of explaining it so fully and clearly that nobody has any questions. But then my insecure side kicks in, and I fear that you've all fallen asleep. So please, questions would help me in a couple of different ways here. Okay, I see some coming in on the chat window. Love this question. Where does Yammer fit in the Office 365 system? Let's see. This is Thursday, right? So here's the answer for this Thursday. A little background on that, and thanks to Mark for bringing this one up. The Yammer is part of that social enterprise social. It was a separate company, software as service, that was purchased by Microsoft. And Yammer has been put into the group that does Exchange Server and SharePoint. Link, which is in some ways similar because it does instant messaging and whatnot, is actually part of the Skype group, but they work very closely. And people at Microsoft have said point blank in the development end that they think of Exchange Server, SharePoint, and Yammer as a single application from their server development point of view. And so you're going to increasingly see it integrated with things, with Exchange, with SharePoint, which you can already do. Right now, the last time I looked, it was offered through Office 365, but it really is bought as essentially a separate component, and it's pick and choose. I have not seen it bundled into any of the, because Office 365 comes in like licensing bundles, so you can get just the web apps and SharePoint, or you can get just Exchange Online, Outlook web app, or you can get just those two together, or and I've seen none of the bundles I've seen so far have included Yammer. That may be because historically Yammer's sales approach was that, okay, you buy it for the enterprise, and when you buy it, everybody gets it. I suspect over time, since they're already integrating into some aspects of SharePoint 2013, there was a minimal integration with SharePoint 2010, I think you will see in the future Yammer being included in some of those bundles and not in others. But for now, it looks like it's still a decision of let's buy this as essentially a separate and only loosely integrated service. Hope that helps. It was a great question because I was wondering if we had people who'd heard of it and had interest in it. Okay, another one came in. Our early testing shows that Office 365 SkyDrive Pro does not play well with Macs. Is that your experience? We've heard that from many people, but we also have heard for years that getting the Mac world and the Windows world of any sort to talk to each other is really difficult. Microsoft is paying attention to the Apple world. You may have recently seen things about Office becoming available for iPhones and for Android phones. Now be aware, this is not iPads or Android tablets. And one of the things that people don't notice about that is for it to work, you have to have an Office 365 subscription. So they are intending to build that any device, anywhere, anytime thing, and they're intending to include Apple and Android devices of various sorts, and they will offer more of that, it looks like, through Office 365 than if you go it alone. But yes, those things still do not necessarily happily talk to each other. There are for iPads and SharePoint, which is when you're talking SkyDrive Pro, you're really talking SharePoint. There have been some third-party apps out there that kind of did well in our testing and experience. I suspect to get a really good integrated solution, we're just going to have to give Microsoft a little more time. But yes, for now, thank you, Rick, for bringing that question up. If you have a good mix of Macs in your environment, you want to look into that before you go too far down the road. I have not heard of any real great snap-it-in-place solution for that. Another question. Is there a tie between mobile devices and Office 365? Kind of covered that with the that if you want the Office on some of the mobile devices, you have to be using Office, have to have an Office 365 subscription. The other one that you want to watch, when you're talking Windows Surface devices or Windows 8 devices, and Windows 8 RT, which is the one that you can't install traditional software on. That one comes with a version of Office, and I was shocked at just how fully featured that version is. But the only thing it doesn't do is anything that requires an add-in or a plug-in, because it doesn't do that. But if you're using those devices, there is an Office 365 tie-in there, because that is licensed for personal use only. And I don't think Microsoft is out there running a dragnet for people that bought one of those devices and are making it and using it for business purposes. But technically, as a company, if you're going to use those devices, Office 365 may be attractive to you in terms of getting licensing for the version of Office that comes on those. But the other mobile devices, just keep watching. They're rolling it out. I expect to see the tablet devices soon, and yeah, you may need Office 365 to get some of the stuff you want to work mobile to actually work. Maureen's asking, how rich is the off-premise experience for the end user? Very often it is, well, the Office 365 experience depends entirely on which license they have. Some people, basically all they get is email and calendar. That's it. Other people actually download the full Office. But within what they get, what you've licensed that particular person to do, there's very little difference between the hosted or off-premise and on-premise experience. If you're talking about your typical end user, now if you're talking about like you have people that are SharePoint developers, okay, you need to get them involved in finding out, because you don't always, as with any hosted solution, you don't always get to do absolutely anything you want. You don't have the complete and total control that you have over something you install and run yourself. But in terms of the typical end user, they're probably not going to notice the difference. If you're talking the higher users, typically the SharePoint site owners, the SharePoint developer kind of people, and similar things in other technologies, they may notice a difference in terms of what settings are available. Although already from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013, a significant number of administrative things that weren't available hosted on 2010 are available hosted on 2013. So the trend on that is in a direction of making it more similar, and we do have a few clients that are happy to see that. We have some other clients for whom it really didn't matter, and it almost never matters for your typical end user. Okay, I think looks like we've gotten. Thank you, Maureen, for that question. That looks like we've got all of the questions covered, and we are right at the time we promised to end. I do very much want to thank you for joining us today. And I appreciate the questions that did good. It really helps me a lot when we get questions. Confirms what I know to be true, that I don't communicate perfectly, and also reassures me that you were awake, which I greatly appreciate. If you do have any follow-up questions, there's my email address. And I would be glad to hear from you about what's going on. I may sometimes the questions tend to be things about what are the exact licensing. On this, I'm going to be telling you who you need to talk to or describing that person, because some of the specifics of that are not something I keep up on. But in terms of end user experience, that I do keep up on, and I can share what other people have told us. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us today, and we'll be concluding our webcast at this time.